back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're going to be examining the Visitation, which is, I believe, the fifth Doctor story. Um,
Sounds about right.
yeah. It's got some interesting stuff in it. I actually read that Peter Davison considers this in his favorite 3 stories that he filmed for Doctor Who.
Huh.
Let me just double check that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of his favorite 3 serials.
Cool.
That he was on. I don't think I have as strong an impression of this story as he does, but
Sure.
I think I liked it enough.
I knew this story had a fairly good reputation among Who fans. I will say that I think the back half is stronger than the first half. For a number of reasons. And that's not a bad thing because you obviously it's worse to be for a story, I think, to be front heavy because you need that ending to really have impact. But I don't know whether making the story shorter would have helped, but I just wasn't as interested in the first 2 episodes as I was with the last 2.
I tend to agree. I think a lot of the interesting stuff does come towards the end. And I found the Peter Davison quote, which is from a BBC interview around the time of the 50th anniversary. It's like 2 days before Day of the Doctor came out. Okay, here it is. So his full quote is, "When I grew up watching Doctor Who, I loved the ones where he tinkered with history, so I liked The Visitation, where I started the Great Fire of London." Yeah, it is what happens. I loved Earthshock because Cybermen were my favourite monsters. My favourite story of all was my last one, The Caves of Androzani, because we had a classic Doctor Who writer, Bob Holmes, and it was directed by Graham Harper, who directed far more filmically than it had ever been done before.
Yeah, I think Graham Harper also did Revelation, and I also think he did Rise of Cybermen and Age of Steel and a couple of other revival stories as well.
Yes,
anyway,
he's jumped in for the revival a few times. And speaking of Brew, our friend Eric Saywood is back.
Yep. This was his first story.
This was his first, correct. So he did this, Earthshock, Resurrection of the Daleks, and then God's Mistake, Revelation of the Daleks. Sorry, that's a bit unfair.
I was going to say, okay, this is a small thing. Pardon me for the digression, but I've heard you talk about Revelation before in a frustrated way. Even when we talked about the story, I don't remember you being that spiteful towards it.
I think I don't think that. I'll say this: I don't think the time has served that episode well in my eyes. Like I remember less and less about it the more I think about it. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough.
And for me, it has a similar issue we talked about with the macro last week. How the Daleks don't really need to be there, and they it's a Davros story, it's not a Dalek story. But I do think that when I made that comment, I did have Attack of the Cybermen in my head instead of Revelation of the Daleks.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I think that's where that comment came from.
Yeah, sure.
Well, he was script editor for Attack of the Cybermen, so
well,
I have crossed a little bit, but that's where it was.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, but it also, when we talked about Attack of the Cybermen, there's still debate as to who wrote that. It was a whole thing. So anyway,
that's right. I think that's where that comment came from more than anything else.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
The Visitation, I think I do agree. I think a lot of the interesting stuff does come in its last 2 episodes. When we actually get to know the Pteroleptals a bit better, and we get to figure out what they're up to and what the historical context is. The first 2 are, I think they are a little too slow for my taste. I think that Richard Mace is a fun side character who tends to elevate he tends to elevate the material when he's on screen. I don't think that the episode manages its companions well. I think there's one too many companions in this story, and I don't think they all do quite enough to justify there being so many of them.
I can agree with that. I think that may have been a bit of an issue in this era, that there were just too many companions. You'll notice that Nyssa kind of gets sidelined a little bit.
I don't mind Nyssa getting sidelined because she is doing something. She's working on that machine, albeit it takes down the android and not much else, but that is an important part. For me, it's Adric's involvement that is incredibly minimal in the story.
Well, I mean, he does get to, and maybe because I'm just putting in this integrated context of the the season, but he does have that sort of journey where, the Doctor doesn't trust him. He's reprimanding him for some reckless decisions he made in the episode Kinder, which was right before this. But then in the end, Adric sort of learns to sort of take a risk and manages sort of saving the day a little bit there.
I don't know how strong that is though, because it's like at the start, the Doctor's trying to teach him to not be so, not take so many risks, and at the end of the story, he takes a risk,
and it pays off.
Well, it pays off, but like at that point, it just means that like everything the Doctor was saying at the start is kind of irrelevant, and Adric sort of learned the wrong lesson from that. He's like, "Oh, this risk worked. I guess I'll take more of them in the future." It's completely backwards to what the Doctor's trying to teach.
Yeah, I guess so.
But also, like, even outside of that context, like a lot of Adric's stuff is being coupled with a different character, right? He's trapped with Tegan for a bit, but then manages to escape on his own. Then he's in the TARDIS with Nyssa, and then wanders off, only to get captured, and then immediately come back and lead the android there, which Nyssa deals with. And his only real contribution is to bring the TARDIS to the Doctor in the house, which I don't know much about Nyssa, but I think maybe she could have handled that if she decided that was something that needed to be done. Like I said, I don't know Nyssa's strengths and weaknesses, but she seems pretty intelligent, so she could presumably fly the TARDIS. So I do think that Adric is kind of the weak link in terms of companions in this story, and that's with Tegan there, whose primary role for at least 25% of the story is being mind controlled.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I think for me, with Adric and the Doctor, there is a little bit of richness, I think, in those sort of miscommunications and the lack of understanding between the two characters. The fact that the Doctor, because he is right in a lot of ways to be just a bit dismissive of Adric, because he is young, a little bit hot-headed. He thinks he's smarter than he actually is, and there's obviously a lot of, I think, room for interesting character conflicts there. So when I see that sort of arc, it feels like it has a little bit more weight than Nyssa, who's just sort of like, don't get me wrong, she's taking an active, participation in the plot, which is important, but because there aren't the context of those sort of conflicts between her and the Doctor, it just doesn't feel as potent. Now, with that said, I will freely admit I am putting this into the greater context of the season, especially with Earthshock, and that makes sense because Eric Saywood also wrote that story, and this arc of Adric sort of taking risks and combating the Doctor, and what does that all mean? That all comes to a head with Earthshock, and the Doctor realizes, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been so shitty to Adric. Maybe I should have trusted his instincts. If I took the time to really talk to him and to maybe teach him, he wouldn't have taken that stupid mistake that cost him his life in Earthshock. That's sort of what I'm comparing it to. It's sort of the because I don't remember exactly what his interactions were like with the Fourth Doctor, but these elements particularly get brought up, I think, with the Fifth Doctor in this season. So I think for me, it's just putting it into context where I can see where this is going, and I like it for at least attempting to put in that kind of richness. Now, with all of that said, as we've often said on this podcast, we do have to judge the stories in and of themselves, and it's taking that character arc away from the context of the rest of the season. Yes, I do understand what you mean. It's not as strong as you'd want it to be, and it may not even be as strong as Eric Saywood thinks it is, if that makes sense.
Sure. I think if the episode had actually spotlighted that moment towards the end and like actively shown Adric being like, "See, Doctor," I think I might be more inclined to agree with you. But for me, it's just like it just stands out as something that is kind of like I'd completely forgotten about that entire exchange in episode 1 by the time it got to that moment. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, okay.
It's clear, sure. If it was intentional, it wasn't highlighted nearly enough. Before we get into any more specifics and before any of the timescales, Recently, I have been sort of delving more into the individual user reviews and the timescales to try and get a sense of what the larger Doctor Who community thinks, like besides just the numbers.
Yeah, sure.
And in this situation, I think I'm more baffled than anything I've ever been, because this is a user review that gives a 3 out of 10 score for the Visitation. Also with a 3 out of 10 for plot, a 3 out of 10 for acting, a 3 out of 10 for replay, and a 3 out of 10 for effects. So they've clearly put heaps of thought into that. And here is the text. Here's what they have to say. And I'm reading this word for word. I'm not leaving out any words. And even though it might sound so, here's the review. Nothing but a farce. The story is phony. The pterodactyls are psychopaths who've done all the trouble of escaping prison to save themselves and not harm humans if the humans have done nothing wrong with the pterodactyls. How do the pterodactyls know the Doctor? Why does the Doctor accept the fact to be handcuffed and become a prisoner? You know what? It's horrible. Just tasteless. Do you understand any of those? Well, do those words make sense in that order? Because like that third sentence, I've read it like 10 times. I can't figure out what he's trying to say.
Yeah, some of it does. Some of it does make some sense. I don't agree with it, but some of it kind of makes sense. As to how they know the Doctor, I mean, they were being deliberately vague, but Adric and Tegan were telling the pterodactyl leader who the Doctor was. In terms of how the pterodactyls know the Doctor, about the Time Lords, they don't. They only know that he has access to a time-traveling ship.
Exactly.
Which they make clear, so that's all they know, and that's all they kind of need to know. And as for how the Doctor knows the pterodactyls, we know by this point that the Doctor is an intrepid adventurer of time and space. The fact that the Doctor can just sort of pull these sort of weird references to alien species and technology out of thin air is well established by this point. That really shouldn't be a surprise. I would go so far as to say that that's a non-issue, really.
No.
So that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Why does the Doctor accept the fact to be handcuffed and become a prisoner? I feel like it's just like evident in the episode that he doesn't accept the fact, but like he's forced into it.
Yeah, he's having that conversation while the guy's literally, while the pterodactyl leader is literally putting the cuffs on him. It's not like, and he escapes from it in, a few minutes later, so it's not as if. Yeah, what does he mean accept? That doesn't.
Don't know, but I think
does this user think that the Doctor could have done something else, or could have? Yeah, that just doesn't make sense to me.
But also, again, I don't want to put too much of an emphasis on it, but the pterodactyls are psychopaths who've done all the trouble of escaping prison to save themselves and not harm humans if the humans have done nothing wrong with the pterodactyls. Question mark? Exclamation mark? What are you trying to say? What is the problem you're trying to highlight with that sentence? I don't understand you, Dr. Gabriel, the one and only.
I mean, maybe they're saying that the pterodactyls, so they're trying to escape, but as long as the humans don't cause them any harm, then that's okay. But then they come in with this plot of destroying a life. But that's still explained as to why they're doing that clearly enough.
They clearly lay out their entire motivation
several times,
and in very clear detail. Like, pay attention to the story, Dr. Gabriel.
And even sort of on a broader sort of context level, the episode makes it very clear that these are very disturbingly bigoted creatures that view humans as, like a subspecies that, like a pest, needs to be eradicated. So let's not ignore that. And let's not ignore the fact the Doctor just said, oh, okay, so you mean genocide. That's, so, none of that really makes sense.
Yeah, putting that one person's ridiculous ramblings aside, this episode has an average rating of 7.2.
I want to say that's about right. Now that, having watched it now, again, like I've watched it twice now in the last couple of days, I probably might put it a bit lower, but 7.2. Okay, I can understand that.
Oh, sorry. We do this for Classic Who. Let's figure out where roughly it stands in the rankings on Classic era stories. It's about the 1, 2, 3. Like it's the 10th highest rated Fifth Doctor story.
Yeah.
So it's pretty firmly in the middle there.
Yeah, that. Yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. What does it sit between?
It's between Snake Dance and Frontios.
Okay. Right. Huh.
Yeah, what else have we got? Let's get into specifics. 7.2 for plot, which I don't know. I don't know if it's a big strength of this story.
No. Again, back half is pretty good, but
yes, but even a lot of it just feels like walking back and forth between destinations, and then getting captured and going back, and then getting captured again, and going back to a different place, and a lot of it feels kind of aimless before the last third of the story.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, and a lot of it, a lot of the part of the story that's really good isn't even super plot heavy, because a lot of the great parts are when the Doctor's interacting with the Pterodactyl leader. That's, I think, the most interesting part, and then maybe the climax, which is quite apocalyptic and grim, and is fairly potent. But yeah, generally speaking, plot, it's, I don't know if I'd say it's. I mean, it's certainly not the weakest we've seen, but it's not amazing, and not one of the strong points, I think, in this story.
No.
Yeah.
7.7 for acting.
I mean, I don't think there's anyone super terrible here. I mean, even the townsfolk.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them, they're hypnotized, so that's a bit of a different thing. But
sure,
generally they're fine.
By the same notion, I don't think anyone's really blowing me away in this story either. Like it's weird. It's really tough to say, but I just don't think that many of the performances, even from our leads, are all that impressive in this.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't suppose that any of the performances, especially from the leads, even if they're not, spectacularly great, I don't think it necessarily needs to be. But on the other hand, given that the plot already has issues, so it really can't back up any, average performances, that's just kind of a bit of a blow to it, really, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even like the Pterodactyl leader, like I really like him as a character, and given I assume the layers of makeup that actor is performing under, he's doing pretty well. He's fun, but most of that comes from the writing. As a performance, he is being. There are some moments, especially, where I'm surprised how sort of generic bad guy he's actually being. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's trying to say, because the Doctor says, for all the Pterodactyl's appreciation of beauty, I can't understand their fixation on war. Maybe there's a dichotomy going on there, but I'm willing to bet that no one working on this story thought that deeply about the psychology of this character. Sure. So I think it's more just I'm bad guy, I'm gonna do generic bad guy things. Maybe even he felt frustrated in walking around in a heavy hot costume for hours, and he wanted to vent some of that frustration, which
maybe.
Right. The point is, if the Pterodactyl leader particularly has strength, it's mostly from the writing, and not so much from the performances. Yeah.
7.1 for effects. A lot of this is surprisingly solid.
Yeah, a lot of it's practical. The Pterodactyl leader costume, I'm surprised how good that looks.
Well, especially because when he first walks out, it looks so inherently goofy.
Yeah, like it could have. Like, you can tell it's a Doctor Who costume, right? The movements are fairly minimal. But given that, I think is still pretty convincing. Like, and you see the other pterodactyls as well. Like, there's a physicality to the way they look. The fact that they've got this weird reptilian look to them comes across quite viscerally. I like the scarification on the pterodactyl leader's face. And even the way the mouth moves, again, given this is early 80s Doctor Who, pretty impressive how that looks. The very least that I think can be said is that we've seen much worse.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But it is what it is. Like, it's.
I also just think that it's for the time at least a really impressive effect when the Doctor's poking through the brick wall. Like, it looks surprisingly solid. And there's a shot especially where he, like Richard Mace, he walks through the wall and then immediately turns around and puts his hands on it, and then the camera moves. It's the same shot, and I didn't notice any cuts. There might have been, but I was like, whoa, how'd they do that? That's really because you would imagine it would be the. I don't know. I just can't explain why I was so impressed by that shot. Other than
No, that makes sense.
As soon as the camera starts moving, you're like, wait a minute, that's now just a brick wall. But he walked through it, and there weren't any.
No. That's a sense of innovation. That's clearly a good combination of smart direction and savvy use of special effects and performance. Really.
Yeah, and I also quite like the effect when the pterodactyl is burning at the end. It's a really nice.
Yeah, that scene overall. That was a really visceral and kind of unpleasant scene, but in a good way, if that makes sense. It's very. You get that devastation, and that effect when he's his face is basically getting boiled alive. That's really.
It's. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that's it. That word that I just used. That's the best way to describe it. It is very convincingly icky, which is kind of great. And the fact that even in a way they're willing to go that far, because that's a really horrifying image, is kind of admirable. So yeah, I mean,
yeah, 7.1 for replay value.
Yeah, I think some parts of it looked weaker on a second viewing, and there was nothing in it really that got much better on a second viewing, so maybe a little lower than that. I mean, it's not terrible, but yeah, it's not as strong on repeated viewing as it could be, I suppose.
And 7 out of 81 people say this requires a previous story. I don't really think it does all that much.
I mean, maybe to get the context of all the companions' relationships. Oh, actually, no. You do need a little bit, I think, because the previous story, Kinder, involved the beginning of the story is Tegan wants to go back to Earth, and that would actually be expanded on later on in Time Flight, which he does actually go back to Earth.
Right.
But I think, and granted, it's been ages since I've seen Kinder, but I think there's probably a bit of trauma going on there, because in that story, she basically gets possessed by a terrifying being called the Mara, and I think
they touched on that briefly at the start of this one.
So that is sort of the impetus for why they're there in the first place, and also why Tegan is behaving the way she is, and the fact that there is some conflict with the Doctor. Having said that, and this kind of goes back to what you said with Adric, that conflict isn't expanded on that much. I mean, there's little bits and pieces of it there where we kind of see how shittily the Doctor's treating Tegan, but that's never really confronted.
But it is nice that they at least had that conversation where they apologize to each other and
that's true.
That brief moment. I do find it odd that the last episode featured a heavy emphasis on Tegan getting possessed, and in this she gets mind controlled, and then they don't reference it at all. They don't draw a parallel to it in any way.
Yeah, I must admit, because as I think I've often said, Classic Who in particular, even for a serialized show, is actually that's not the correct term. Classic Who is very episodic, so it's not like there aren't character arcs or consistent narrative stories, but they're not as strong or consistent as they are in Revival Who. So I was in a way actually a little bit surprised to see that they did confront the issue of Tegan being possessed in the way that they did, but it's still, as you say, the fact that they didn't make a link between that and the fact that she was hypnotized seems a little mystifying. Certainly, I would imagine that would have been confronted more directly in a revival story. It's certainly a good revival story. They would have done that. So, yeah.
I'll briefly read the synopsis. The Doctor attempts to take Tegan back to Heathrow Airport, but the TARDIS arrives in the 17th century instead of the 20th. The time travelers discover that a space capsule has crash landed nearby, and that its alien occupants, 3 pteroleptal prison escapees, intend to wipe out all indigenous life on Earth by releasing rats infected with an enhanced strain of the Great Plague. The creatures are also using a sophisticated android to strike terror into the local villages. Aided by itinerant thespian Richard Mace, the Doctor tracks the pteroleptals to their base in Pudding Lane, London. The creatures are ultimately destroyed when a fire breaks out and the pteroleptals' leader weapon explodes, also setting off the Great Fire of London.
So yeah, I mean, that happens.
Yep. It's so bizarre, like at the end of the episode when the Doctor, with a big goofy smile, says, "Oh, I have a feeling I'm going to want to let this fire keep going."
Yeah.
And then learning the context
we'll just let the
of the
fire burn.
devastation. And then learning the context of the devastation of the Great Fire. Like, Jesus. I did a bit of research into trying to figure out, did the Great Fire like do anything to stop the plague or anything like that? Like, was there anything that was good about it in that way?
Yeah, did it kill all the rats?
Yeah, and I did learn that like it is disputed whether or not the Great Fire could have contributed to the downfall of the plague or not. Like, some people think it does, some people think it didn't. I just find it so weird because, like, normally this in Revival Who, this would be a situation where it's like, I'm sorry, this is a fixed point in time. I can't interfere with the Great Fire of London. It has to burn. But here he's just like, well, I think I just might.
And then he says like, oh, I'll explain it to you one day. And then we just cut to the sign of Pudding Lane. But it kind of goes back to what I said when we were looking at Gridlock, in that the Doctor is being very sort of obtuse and mystifying and private and even kind of confounding. Like Tegan says, do you have to give a convoluted answer to everything? And you wonder again, like there's something uncomfortable almost about that. Like the Doctor, how can I put this? Okay, the YouTuber Davis, who I'm quite fond of, I'm sure you've watched, I'm sure people listening to this podcast have watched. I think he said when he did like a list of ranking the Doctors from most to least Tory, and it was very funny watching that. Not least of all because of how weirdly accurate he is with it. But one of the things he said was that I think he said that Peter Davison was like the second most Tory Doctor. And one of the things that he pointed out when he talked about that is how much of a kind of a sort of selfish and petulant child the Doctor can be. And I don't know if I'd go that far, to say that that's totally true. But man, like, there are just moments in this story where I'm like, is that really the most emotionally mature way you could have handled that, Doctor? Maybe you could have explained what the Fire of London was. Maybe you could have talked to Tegan a bit more. Maybe you couldn't have been, so much of a shit to Adric. I mean, it's just... And it's not terrible. It doesn't ruin the character. It, in a way, gives him a bit of richness. But it's just a very funny and interesting thing that seems to crop up in this story, and more so, I think, than even other Fifth Doctor stories. So, yeah.
But besides that, that synopsis skips over pretty much the entirety of episodes 2 and 3, in terms of its explanation of the plot. A lot of it, as I mentioned, is kind of like, the Doctor's in the house, now he's going back to the TARDIS. Oh, he's been stopped on the way, he's following the miller, getting a horse. Oh, they've been captured there, now they've been taken back to the house.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just kind of this, like, I wouldn't even say that a lot of it is building up a huge mystery either, or laying the seeds for other stuff, because we do just get the entire explanation in one go, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, even with the way the Pterolepta leader is presented early on, there's a kind of a mystery there, right? Like, what is this weird android thing with the death mask? Who is controlling the android and stuff? And that's a thing we've seen in Doctor Who before and would see again. But when you set up those mysteries, you need to have, I think, a satisfying revelation to them. But here it's just, it's evil, scary reptile dude, and then we just find out what his plan is, so it doesn't really work. And as you say, that sort of fits into the greater context of, if there's a mystery being set up here, it's not really been justified very well by the plot. I mean, I think I wrote down in my notes here something like, I don't know if I'd say this is a completely pointless and aimless wandering around, but it's could have more of a point, to be sure.
Yeah.
Because it is very, oh, we're here, and then we're there, and then we're here again, and then, oh, wait, no, we're back here. Also, and this is just sort of fits into the whole thing, pretty weak cliffhangers, let's be honest.
No, absolutely. I noted that as well. Like, it's especially the first one where it's like, Doctor, oh no, they're gonna break through, Doctor! And then the next episode it's, Doctor, oh no, they're gonna break through, Doctor! Yeah?
Yeah, it's... or even, like, when the... Oh, honestly, this is really dumb, but when the Doctor is about to be executed with a scythe, and then literally the next episode, the town leader says, like, wait, stop! Jesus Christ, man. Like, that reminds me, there's one scene in the movie Eyes Wide Shut that's like that, and the whole point of that scene in that movie is that it was a farce and a joke, in a way. That's a whole other thing, but the point is, that sort of thing is done in this story unironically. It's literally just...
And it's got that thing again where it's like, if you continue the story for like a minute, the cliffhanger could be they got captured by the person with the bracelet. That's a better cliffhanger.
Yeah. It's like, and that scene when the town's leader comes in, honestly, that's literally like a Gilbert and Sullivan moment. That's what it's like. It's like, you know, oh, what is it from fucking Mikado with Kadisha's entrance? That's what it's like.
Yeah, a little bit. I think I can say that. Yeah.
It's oh god, it's so dumb.
Mm.
It's literally like, it's literally your revel cease, assist me, all of you. That's what this is. It's
totally,
so...
yeah.
Oh god, that's just dumb. Anyway,
moving on to some positives.
Sure.
Quickly, I do like the historical context of a lot of this and how it ties in. Like,
yeah, that's pretty decently done, particularly in the back half.
Yeah, like Great Fire of London aside, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. I do like how in like there's like a looming threat throughout the first part of like, we don't let the villagers catch you or they'll kill you because they think you've got plague, and then plague ends up being a crucial aspect of the plan, and the villain's plan rather. I quite enjoy that, and I think that it's probably like the closest that Doctor Who can get to doing a plague episode, because then you run into the other, like if you do another episode about the Black Death, you inevitably run into the situation of a companion saying, "Doctor, can't you do something?" And the Doctor going, "Sorry, I can't." Literally every single person that died of the Black Death did so under a fixed point in time. Like, it's difficult to get around that, and you have to do another Fires of Pompeii, which did it as best as it's ever going to be done. So, I this is probably the best they could have done with the subject matter.
Yeah, I'd agree. Actually, speaking of the cliffhangers, just remind me, the resolution of the cliffhanger to episode, but the one that ends episode 3 and begins episode 4, does that get resolved pretty quickly? I think it does.
It's the Doctor uses his electric thing that he demonstrated previously.
Okay, sorry, no, where did he demonstrate it again? Because I think I was a bit confused with that when I saw it.
He demonstrated it. It was a point where I think Richard Mace was he was like citing something of like, I can't fathom any of the stuff that you're saying, Doctor. None of it makes any sense to me. And then he demonstrates the electricity thing, being like, well, how's this? Like, there's clearly stuff that can happen that's beyond your understanding. And then he uses the same thing later on.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense.
To distract Richard and Tegan, yeah.
I was a little bit confused, but yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so that's not too bad. That's certainly better than the other ones, but
yes,
yeah, still not a great story for cliffhangers.
No, definitely not.
Speaking
of Richard Mace, I think he's a joy.
He's really fun.
I love his dialogue and I love his character. He was played by Michael Robbins, who I don't think has many huge acting credits outside of this. He was in The Great Muppet Caper and The Pink Panther Strikes Again, but nothing else that I recognized in any way.
I feel like I've seen him in other Doctor Who stories. I don't know why. There's just something about him.
Yeah, I don't know. This is only Doctor Who credit, at least.
Right. I feel like I've seen him. Maybe I've seen similar actors, or anyway.
Maybe. I mean, this kind of character is not uncommon to the show. Like the big fun
The lovable rogue.
The lovable rogue, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. He's a fun character. It's just kind of a shame though that he's not situated in a stronger plot, because that could be really interesting. I think. But as it is, it's it is what it is, I suppose.
He's by and large one of the more enjoyable parts of the story.
Oh yeah,
especially his reckoning of the stuff that's happening and his slow come to grips with just accepting that a lot of this stuff is beyond comprehension and just going with it.
Yeah. Tell you what surprised me. A couple of things actually, and these are smaller elements, but when they go into the Terraliptal ship, and Richard Mace says, how are its dimensions different on the inside? I almost thought, are they going to do like a TARDIS thing here? Is that what
that was my first thought as well.
Yeah, but they didn't.
No, it's just buried.
Yeah, that sort of surprised me. And then later on, when he actually does go into the TARDIS and see that it's bigger on the inside than on the outside, I wonder, could the Doctor have explained it by saying, "Oh, well, you're an entertainer. Imagine this as like a grand conjuring trick or something," which is kind of what it is. So that would be interesting. Anyway, those are details. But as you say, overall, he is a very entertaining character.
Yes.
And in a way, it is kind of a shame that he gets kind of hypnotized, because that's when he's at his least interesting.
Yeah.
Because I mean...
But there is that implied urgency to break him out of it again.
Oh, for sure,
let's get this character back. He's too fun.
Yeah, because we care about him. Yeah, for sure. I want to bring something up in terms of the plot that surprised me a little bit. So that family at the beginning, now having those sorts of those openings where you have maybe some people that you care about a little bit, that's something we've seen in Doctor Who, and particularly in the revival series, right? We might see a very brief glimpse at a character or a couple of characters, then they'll come to peril in some way, and then bam, we snap to the credits. That makes sense. But the problem here is we spend too much time with them for that to really work.
Definitely.
So by the time I got to the second viewing of this story, I actually thought, right, well, why aren't we focusing on these characters? Why are we running around the English countryside when there are these, to be fair, kind of interesting characters? Could we not have had that be the focal point of the story and just sort of bring Richard Mace in there, and then have one of them be sick with the plague? Or there's got to be a way that could have been worked in.
It's strange, yeah. It's almost like they do too good a job fleshing out those characters in the first 5 minutes of the story.
Yeah.
Only to kill them all off screen and never see any of them again. It's a shame because a lot of the dynamics are like even just from a few lines of dialogue, you learn so much about them.
Yeah, and it's not even that they're trying to do anything super, I guess, sort of groundbreaking. They're not trying to, I don't know. I strongly doubt whether Eric Saywood is trying to make a commentary on the brevity of existence. We're saying, oh, here's these great characters you care about. Nope, they're dead. No, I don't think that he's aiming for anything so lofty. So it just sticks out, really.
Well, it's also a shame because a lot of the stuff that happens in those first 5 minutes is presented to us as a mystery in the rest of episode 1 when they're trying to figure out what happened in the house.
Yeah.
But it's all stuff we've seen before, so it's all kind of meaningless.
Yeah. It doesn't... That beginning is it doesn't even really... It really doesn't tie in at all, I don't think. I mean, the fact that they see, a bunch of what they think are like shooting stars or explosions, and that's the Terraliptal ship showing up, but there's you could have taken care of that in some other way, surely.
Yeah.
And at the very least, honestly, apart from Richard Mace, there aren't really any other interesting side characters, so I wonder...
because they're all either brainwashed or running around as a mob, which isn't that interesting.
He at least has got a kind of a rebellious, roguish streak. So those characters at the beginning, they're more interesting than the side characters in the rest of the story. So you wonder why Eric Saywood didn't do that. That would have been really interesting.
It would have been really great if at the start of episode 2 we find them, or some of them, who they've hidden in a certain part of the house that the Terraliptals haven't found them in yet. And so a huge part, then there could have been sort of yes, we're aimlessly walking around the countryside, but we're also doing it to usher them away and to safety.
Yeah,
Let's get them back to the TARDIS. They'll be able to look after them properly in there, and then through that they discover, oh, hang on, who are these people? And Pterodactyls could see them moving away and going, hang on a minute, where are they going? Who are they? You tell me who they are. Oh,
yeah,
we've got a time machine. Follow them then.
or even because it's strongly implied that those characters at the beginning get killed because there's these very eerie, unsettling shots of the empty house, and I think the chessboard's being left there, and there's a candle burning on the table. So wouldn't it have been would it not have been more interesting if, they disappear, but then it's revealed, oh, they didn't die, they were kidnapped, and then they were brainwashed, and they were made, to be servants of the Pterodactyls, and they're now doing their bidding, and they're the ones, sort of, I mean, they wouldn't be orchestrating it because Pterodactyls would be, but they're the human characters that are ordering the other human characters about to kidnap our companions. That would have been more interesting, but instead we just get this kind of, let's be honest, pretty aimless sort of wandering around the English countryside. I mean, the countryside looks really pretty. That's cool, but
Sure.
it just would have been more interesting. Maybe there was a budgetary or a scheduling thing. It's like, oh, we have to shoot in the English countryside for a week. Let's just write around that. But
maybe, I don't know.
Either way, there's missed potential there. And given that what replaces it isn't all that interesting, it's just a real shame.
Yeah, and by that token, and it's weird to say this, but I kind of feel like we've already discussed everything that we need to about this story. I don't feel like there's too much substance in City. You might have taken more notes, but for me, I'm already pretty tapped out.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I think I did touch on this before, but I'll reiterate it. I do really like those conversations between the Pterodactyl leader and the Doctor.
Yeah,
going into the backstory and seeing him trying to reason with this character and sort of that sort of character journey until the Doctor realizes, oh no, this person is trying to, commit genocide, and that's really disturbing.
I agree. Like that first conversation between the Doctor and the Pterodactyl is when the episode came to life.
Yeah,
and he's offering alternatives, and the Pterodactyl's going, well, that wouldn't work for this reason. And then the Doctor says, okay, what about this? Well, that wouldn't work for this reason. Fair enough. What about this? Well, that wouldn't work because I'm a bigot and I hate humanity.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's that classic thing of the Doctor extending the olive branch and saying, look, I can help you, but if you don't take my hands and let me help you now,
and also
gotta help you because I won't.
Yeah, and again, it's such a Doctor thing to say in that moment where he's like, the Pterodactyl says, even this species sees glory in war, and the Doctor says, well, yes, but by your own words, they're primitive. So what's your excuse?
Yeah, which is just
such a brilliant piece of dialogue.
Yeah, wonderful way to sort of just needle that horrible, really horrible mentality. And of course, the Pterodactyl, he just can't handle it and just, sort of moves on ahead with his plan.
But there's the other one later on as well that is punctuated by, this is not an argument, that was a statement!
Yeah, which is really great. Again, it's showing that he's shutting down and he can't take the fact that he's, he can't cope with the facts and logic.
It's a small thing as well, but I also do like that this group of Pterodactyls are prisoners and like fugitives from their own civilization.
Yeah,
it's such a small detail to add in, but it does wonders for the whole. All of this species are warmongers thing. Like, obviously, it's implied that the Pterodactyls do have similar attitudes surrounding beauty and war, and the two sides of the same coin kind of thing. Yeah. But positioning this group as specifically fugitives from the rest of them, it demonstrates, okay, maybe this lot are a bit more ruthless or a bit more bigoted or a bit more this, and that. That shows that there is variation amongst the species, which is a small bar to clear, but Doctor Who often doesn't.
Yeah, and it's good to see it here.
Yes.
They did similar stuff with Leisure Hive.
Yeah.
And in a way, I'm actually glad I just brought that up, because here's the thing. Leisure Hive is flawed, as we discussed. There are a lot of issues with that story. But I actually enjoy the good parts of that story more than the good parts of this story. So I'm really starting to think, how low am I going to rate this episode?
See, that's difficult for me because I kind of see these. What did I rate the Leisure Hive as? I gave it a 6. We both gave it a 6.
Yeah, both gave it a 6.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of torn because, like, I think the good parts of this story are good, and I do kind of think that the Leisure Hive is more experimental than this is.
Yeah,
it's trying more things, but I don't remember any distinct parts of the Leisure Hive, or at least like individual characters, more than I remember Richard Mace. That feeling might disappear after a week or two when I've had other episodes to watch.
Cool.
But I don't know. I kind of see them at the moment being like kind of equal in my eyes.
I guess so. I think I appreciate the thematic ambitions of Leisure Hive more than this because
No, you're right.
This story, it's doing similar stuff, but Leisure Hive was really sort of taking those arguments further and really examining them, I think, in more detail. With the conflicts between the different species and I can't remember his name, but the Steve Fleming character who looking at the psychological depth of him, I think that for me elevates it a little bit higher than this story.
I assume we're at that point of the episode now.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of examining the other 6s and 5s that I've given in the past.
Yeah.
You have the Crotons. This is better than the Crotons.
Yeah, actually. I mean, Crotons was okay. There was some bits that were alright with that story, but yeah, I think this is better than the Crotons.
Well, I think that clinches it. Like, Leisure Hive is a 6, Crotons is a 6, but there is still a sliding scale in terms of, like, the fact that we don't do decimals and we don't, like...
Yeah.
It's not our job to sit here and be like, mathematically, what do we think? I think that this is getting a 6 from me. I do think that like there's just enough characterization in the early episodes, and there's just enough good moments of like dialogue and like I think Richard Mace, like I said, does a lot of heavy lifting in the first half.
Yeah.
But when we get to that second half, and it does pick up, and it does, pick up the pace, and it does explore different themes, and it does have a few different psychological conversations, or not psychological conversations, but like like
the social commentary,
social commentary, but also just like putting the different mindsets of the Doctor and the pterodactyls, pitting them against each other. The characters coming together and each doing their own thing, and the android holding a scythe with a black cloak over his head, which is just so much fun.
Yeah, the spectacle there, you can't totally discount it. So
I think that's
sure.
right.
Like when you put it all together, pros and cons and weigh it all up. Yeah, I think that does make sense. I think I certainly enjoyed Leisure Hive more than this story. But this story, when it is narratively cohesive, it is still pretty good. And the narrative, even when it's weak, it's not so weak that it just completely falls apart. Like we've seen worse plots than this.
Definitely. And to put this in perspective, like Runaway Bride and Power of the Doctor were 5s for us, or at least for one of us. And both of those stories have big narrative problems and plot holes that this story just doesn't have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's fair. Right. I'll give it a 6 as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Maybe someday we should revisit this and like try and put these in order and go, do the numbers still make sense? But
yeah, sure, that would be interesting.
Not for us to say right now.
Yeah. But yeah, for now, I'll certainly give it a 6.
Yep. And next time we're going to be looking at the first 2-part story of Series 3. That would be Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. They're back again.
What does the Doctor say? Why do I lose everything and they always survive?
They always survive while I lose everything.
Yeah. What a great line.
Yeah, and we're going to get to it, but like this is one of the last times that the Daleks are actually portrayed as scary, and it really achieves that. But we'll see. Until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And I think I smell something burning. Actually, I'll just leave it. What I'm going to do.
Yeah, doesn't matter. Let those fires burn. We didn't start the fire.
Do you think Richard Mace died in the Great Fire of London?
Probably.
Yeah.
That's oof. But look, hey, we didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning. Sorry, I had to do that.